When Whitney Houston walked into Howard Stern's studio in 1992, everyone knew blood was coming. What happened in the next 3 minutes changed shock radio forever and proved that sometimes the greatest power isn't in what you say, but in what you can do. It was a Tuesday morning in March 1992, and Whitney Houston was at the absolute peak of her powers. The Bodyguard soundtrack was dominating the charts. I Will Always Love You was the biggest song in the world, and her face was on every magazine cover from Rolling Stone to Vogue. She was untouchable, unstoppable, and worth over $100 million. She just performed at the Super Bowl, sung for presidents, and broken every record the music industry had. But there was one place where superstars went to get humbled, one microphone that had broken bigger names than hers, and one man who made his fortune by making celebrities squirm. Howard Stern's radio show was legendary for all the wrong reasons. The self-proclaimed king of all media had built an empire by asking the questions nobody else dared to ask, pushing buttons nobody else would push, and turning interviews into blood sport. He'd made Chevy Chase storm out in fury, reduced Kathleen Turner to tears, and gotten Cher to call him an expletive on live radio. He'd made grown men cry, forced A-listers to storm out mid-interview, and created viral moments before the internet even existed. His show reached 20 million listeners across America, and every single one of them tuned in hoping to see someone get destroyed on live radio. And Howard never disappointed. When Whitney's team got the invitation to appear on Stern's show, the response was immediate. Absolutely not. Her publicist called it career suicide. Her manager said Stern would eat her alive. Even Clive Davis personally called to warn her. "He's going to attack everything you stand for," Clive said. "Why would you give him that platform?" But Whitney had made up her mind. "I'm not afraid of any man with a microphone," she told her team. "I've sung for presidents and kings. You think I can't handle one shock jock from Long Island?" Her manager tried one more time. "Whitney, he's going to say you sold out gospel for pop money. He's going to question everything." Whitney just smiled. Let him try. But what Whitney's team didn't know was that she had a plan that would require perfect timing, absolute confidence, and a weapon that Howard Stern had never encountered before, the full, unfiltered power of the greatest voice of a generation. The morning of the interview, Whitney's stylist noticed something unusual. "You're not getting glammed up?" she asked, watching Whitney choose a simple black turtleneck and jeans instead of her usual designer outfits. "This is Howard Stern. Don't you want to look untouchable?" Whitney finished the sentence. "No, I want to look like myself, just a girl from Newark who can sing." When Whitney arrived at the studio, Howard's producer couldn't hide his surprise. The biggest star in the world was standing in their dingy hallway, no bodyguards, no entourage, just her and one quiet assistant. "Mr. Stern is ready for you," the producer said, his voice dripping with the kind of false respect that barely masked the anticipation of the carnage to come. Howard Stern was in his element that morning. His studio was packed with his usual crew. Robin Quivers was ready at the co-host desk, and the phones were already lighting up with callers eager to hear him take down another celebrity. When Whitney walked in, Howard didn't even stand up. He just gestured to the guest chair and said, "Well, well, well, the princess has arrived." Whitney sat down, crossed her legs, and met his gaze directly. No fear, no hesitation. Just calm. "So Whitney," Howard began, his voice already loaded with mock sincerity, "let me ask you something that everyone in America is thinking, but nobody has the guts to say to your face." The studio went quiet. This was the moment everyone tuned in for, the moment where Howard went for the throat. "You grew up singing in church, right? Gospel music. Your mother Sissy sang gospel. Your cousin Dionne Warwick started in gospel. You were raised on Aretha Franklin and Mahalia Jackson." Howard leaned forward, his signature smirk spreading across his face. "So when exactly did you decide to turn your back on all that and sell out for pop money?" The question hung in the air like a slap. Robin Quivers shifted uncomfortably in her chair. The sound engineer looked down at his controls. Even Howard's most loyal staff members knew he'd just crossed a line. But Whitney didn't flinch. She didn't get defensive. She just tilted her head slightly and said, "Is that really your question, Howard? Yeah, that's my question. You want me to repeat it? No, I heard you. I'm just wondering if you actually believe that, or if you're just trying to get a reaction. Howard laughed, but there was an edge to it. I believe it. Look at you. Designer clothes, pop songs, white audiences. You're about as far from a church in Newark as you can get. That's when Whitney did something unexpected. She laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not a defensive laugh, but a genuine from-the-belly laugh that completely threw Howard off his rhythm. What's funny? Howard demanded. You are, Whitney said simply. You think you know me because you've seen me on MTV and heard my songs on the radio. You think you've got me figured out. I think I can spot a sellout when I see one. Whitney leaned back in her chair, completely relaxed. Howard, let me ask you something. Do you know anything about gospel music? I know it's boring, and nobody listens to it except church ladies. Exactly. You don't know anything. Whitney's voice was still friendly, still calm, but there was steel underneath it now. Gospel music isn't about the charts or the money or the fame. It's about using your gift to touch people's souls. It's about taking what God gave you and sharing it with the world. Okay, so where's the gospel and I want to dance with somebody? Howard shot back, his voice dripping with sarcasm. This was the moment Whitney had been waiting for. She uncrossed her legs, sat up straight, and looked directly at Howard with an intensity that made the entire studio sit up and pay attention. Howard, you want to know if I sold out? You want to know if gospel went away when I started singing pop? She paused, letting the question hang in the air. Let me show you what I bought with that sellout money. Before Howard could respond, Whitney turned to the sound engineer. Cut everything. No music, no reverb, no effects. Just turn on this microphone and nothing else. The engineer looked confused. You want to sing? Just do it. Howard smirked. Oh, this should be good. What are you going to do? Sing the phone book? Whitney ignored him. As the engineer killed all the music beds and effects, she closed her eyes for just a moment. When she opened them, something had changed. The friendly pop star was gone. What sat in that chair now was something older, something deeper, something that had nothing to do with MTV or record sales or magazine covers. This one's for you, Howard, she said quietly, since you think gospel died. And then Whitney Houston began to sing. No band, no backing vocals, no studio tricks, just her voice, raw and unfiltered, filling that small radio studio with a sound that shouldn't have been possible from a human throat. She sang His Eye is on the Sparrow, the same gospel song she'd sung in church as a little girl, the same song her mother Sissy had taught her before she could read, the same song that had been sung in black churches across America for over a century. But this wasn't a performance. This was something else entirely. This was Whitney Houston stripped of all the pop star glamour, all the marketing, all the packaging, showing Howard Stern and 20 million listeners exactly what she was made of. This was the voice that had made Clive Davis sign her on the spot. The voice that had caused Aretha Franklin to call her the greatest vocalist of her generation. The voice that had moved presidents to tears. The first note hit like a physical force. Clean, pure, powerful enough to rattle the cheap speakers in that studio. The second note soared higher, effortless, as if gravity itself had no claim on Whitney's voice. By the third note, something was happening in that studio that had never happened before in the history of the Howard Stern Show. Complete and total silence. Howard's mouth was open, but nothing was coming out. Robin Quivers had stopped breathing. The sound engineer had tears running down his face. The phone lines had gone dead because every caller had stopped talking to listen. Whitney sang for 30 seconds. Just 30 seconds. But in those 30 seconds, she took everyone in that studio to church. She showed them what gospel really was, what her voice really could do when it wasn't being packaged for radio or filtered through pop production. When she finished, the silence continued. For 5 full seconds, nobody in that studio made a sound. 5 seconds of dead air on the Howard Stern Show was unheard of, impossible, yet there it was. Howard Stern, the man who always had something to say, who had made a career out of never being at a loss for words, just sat there staring at Whitney Houston with something that looked a lot like shock. Finally, Robin Quivers spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Oh my God." Whitney opened her eyes and looked at Howard. "Gospel didn't go anywhere, Howard. I just took it to more people. Every song I sing, every stage I stand on, I'm carrying what my mother taught me in that church in Newark. The only difference is now millions of people hear it instead of just our congregation." Howard's hand was shaking as he reached for his microphone. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. The mockery was gone. The sarcasm had evaporated. What came out was something his listeners had almost never heard before. Genuine emotion. I don't know what to say. That was, I'm sorry." Whitney smiled gently. "You don't have to be sorry, Howard. You just had to listen." "No, I do have to be sorry. I came at you trying to make you look bad, and you just showed me what real talent is." The rest of the interview was unlike anything Howard Stern had ever done. He asked thoughtful questions. He listened to answers. He even admitted on air that he'd been wrong about her. When Whitney left the studio 40 minutes later, Howard walked her to the door, something he never did. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not walking out, for showing me." "Thank you for listening," Whitney replied. That interview became legendary in radio history. Bootleg recordings circulated for years, passed between DJs and music fans like contraband. Howard's own staff would tell the story at industry parties, describing the moment their boss went silent for the first time in his career. But the real impact was what happened next. From that day forward, Howard Stern became one of Whitney Houston's most unlikely defenders. When other radio hosts or critics went after her, Howard would call them out on air. "You don't know what you're talking about," he'd say. "I tried to tear her down, and she broke me with 30 seconds of singing. That woman is untouchable." Years later, when Whitney's struggles with addiction became public, Howard defended her again. "That woman has more talent in her pinky than most people have in their entire body. Whatever she's going through, she's still Whitney Houston." And when Whitney died in 2012, Howard Stern spent an entire show talking about that morning in 1992. He played the audio of her singing in his studio, and when it finished, he said through tears, "I tried to break her. She broke me, and I'm grateful she did, because it taught me what greatness really sounds like." The lesson of that morning wasn't just about Whitney Houston's talent, though her talent was undeniable. It was about the power of letting your work speak for itself, of responding to criticism not with words but with excellence, of showing doubters who you really are instead of telling them. Whitney Houston walked into a hostile radio studio that morning in 1992 as a pop star being accused of selling out. She walked out as something else entirely, as proof that real artistry can't be diminished by criticism, can't be broken by doubt, and can't be silenced by anyone with a microphone and an agenda. She showed Howard Stern and 20 million listeners that gospel hadn't died when she became a pop star. Gospel had just found a bigger church, and Whitney Houston was still its most powerful voice. If this story of talent triumphing over criticism moved you, please subscribe and share this video with someone who needs to remember that excellence is the best response to doubt. What's your favorite Whitney Houston moment? Let us know in the comments below.